I spent over 24 hours in-game testing every single primary weapon this patch against both factions. So what's the best primary weapon in the game? Well, that's going to depend on your build and mainly your support weapon. So I have a different kind of primary weapon tier list than what you'll be seeing from most YouTubers, and I want to quickly explain how I order my tiers so that we could just get right into the in-depth video. So against bugs, I'll bring a single target weapon. When I'm using a mobbing support like a flamethrower, I'll pair a Dominator with that, but I'll bring a mob clear weapon when I'm using rocket launchers. You know, I don't really like the S tier format because you can't call the Dominator an S tier just because it's great against bile spitters and run that with a rocket launcher, because I feel you'll run into problems every time a little hunter squad shows up, and vice versa. If you're using a mob clear weapon with a flamethrower, you'll run into problems every time a bile spitter shows up. So for me personally, all 4 of these tiers can be S tier with the right support weapon and the right build, and I order things left to right. Now on the other hand, against bots, it's a little bit different because pretty much on Helldive difficulty, you're running into so many Devastators. I feel your primary weapon needs to be pretty decent at taking Devastators out, and you'll notice there's a lot more lower tiers against bots. Now to quickly explain explosive weapons, because you see that at the top of both tiers, explosive weapons can be pretty good single target damage. They might also be pretty good mobbing damage, but explosive weapons notably deal with weak spots a lot better. So an explosive weapon will pop a Bile Titan sack or a Charger butt quicker than many other weapons. And against bots, it'll notably deal damage to the heat sinks even if you don't directly land on them, so you just need to land the bullets close to the heat sinks. Now I did also live stream all of this here on this YouTube channel, so subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to catch my live streams. And let's go ahead and get straight into the tier lists. First assault rifle you unlock in the game, which is the Liberator. Now the Liberator against bugs really doesn't feel too bad, but it's also not the best thing ever. You will notice that your time to kill isn't really horrible, but at the same time, you will be reloading a lot. And this gun is light penetrating so that you won't really be using these against bile spitters. It's not the best at taking out stalkers, and you kind of gotta shoot the weak points in the hive guards. So this gun is just pretty average against bugs. Now, when it comes to bots, on the other hand, I actually think this is a pretty trash tier weapon. You have to land 3 bullets into the Devastator heads to even kill them. And in the heat of battle, you'll find yourself spamming half a magazine and hoping that 3 bullets get into a Devastator head just to take it out. So quickly moving along, we've got the Liberator Penetrator. Now against bugs, I think it's a little bit better than the Liberator because it has similar time to kill on most things, but the notable difference is that you actually can shoot hive guards directly in their head, and you actually can kill bile spitters with this gun, but it's still not that great. It's still a pretty average weapon to me. And against bots, it is surprisingly worse than the Liberator because you still really want to aim for those headshots with Devastators, and you still need to land 3 bullets in the head of Devastators to kill them. And notably against bots, it just has a smaller magazine than the regular Liberator, so you'll find yourself reloading more often. And now let's quickly move on to the Liberator Concussive, and this is the only trash tier weapon against bugs. I don't think many people disagree with this, but this gun just doesn't really do a lot of damage, and it has even less in the magazine compared to the other 2 Liberators, so I really just don't like it against bugs. Now on the other hand, against bots, it really doesn't feel much different to the other Liberators. You still need 3 bullets to the head of Devastators. It still kills little bots, but notably, I'm actually ranking it higher than the other 2 Liberators against bots, because again, you still just need 3 headshots to Devastators, except the difference is, at least Devastators won't be shooting back at you while you're shooting this at them, because it will stun lock them. It's still pretty trash tier, so I really don't recommend using it, but it's kind of funny to see that difference against bots compared to bugs. All right, and now we got the Tenderizer, our first new warbond weapon, and this is pretty average. Now, in my opinion, this is a side grade to the Liberator. On paper, it has worse time to kill against bugs, but surprisingly, the handling of it is actually pretty amazing. It has almost 0 recoil, which is actually quite nice, and I ended up liking it a lot more than the Liberator for that reason, because realistically, it's not really much better or much worse than the Liberator, but it has no recoil, and it just feels a lot better for me to use. So ultimately, I wouldn't care if you said it was worse than the Liberator, but I just like this gun a lot more, and it kind of falls into that same tier against bots, where it basically just It doesn't really do too much, but it has no handling. So for me personally, I rank it higher just because I like shooting this gun. But at the end of the day, it is pretty average. So next we've got the Adjudicator. Now the Adjudicator was in the Democratic Detonation Warbond, and the Adjudicator, again, is an average weapon. It's solid, it does 80 damage per shot, so your time to kill on specific enemies is a bit faster than the Liberator, but it does have a smaller magazine, and you do still have to reload it pretty often, but it does have medium armor pen, so you can shoot hive guards in the head. It's honestly a pretty solid weapon, but I feel like reloading so often kind of drags it down a little bit. And I do actually like the style of the gun, and I do like shooting the gun once again, but at the end of the day, it's the end of the day. This is just another average weapon to throw onto the tier list. But on the other hand, against bots, it actually gets upgraded to the average tier because it notably two shots Devastators in the face. So if you're looking for a average assault rifle to bring against bots, I actually think Adjudicator is the answer. It is medium armor penetrating. It's going to be a little bit better against berserkers compared to the other Liberators. But again, it's mostly a side grade, but like I said, it only takes 2 bullets to kill Devastators in the head with. So in my opinion, against bots, it reaches a break point where it is a bit better than all the other assault rifles. So before we get into the recently buffed marksman rifles, we have to talk about today's sponsor, Blazing Boost. Now, Blazing Boost provides the gaming community with professional services. In Helldivers 2, they offer sample farming, warbond leveling, and connecting you with a pro so you can understand and play the game at a higher level. They have over 34,000 reviews on Trustpilot and have been in the industry since 2012. And they have pro players available to play with you instantly. You can use code THICK8 to get 5% off your orders, and I recommend clicking their link in the description if you're looking to level up your hell diving. All right, so now moving on to the Diligence. Now the Diligence was recently buffed this patch, and again, it's going into the average tier against bugs. Now I would like to put a big asterisk here in saying that if you can keep your encounters long range, the Diligence will actually be a pretty solid weapon. In fact, if you could force yourself into long range against bugs all the time, I would actually move it higher, maybe as a single target weapon. It would end up being closer to the bottom of the single target weapons, but the problem with marksman rifles against bugs is you can't always control how far you're fighting them. There will be, even if you're really good at that, there will probably come a point in your game where you're getting swarmed, and ultimately a marksman rifle just isn't the best option when you're getting swarmed. That's when you'll notice the downside of it. Now against bots, that's where we see the Diligence will go up. I'm putting it in the great tier. It's very solid. It does 2-step Devastators in the head, but the handling of this weapon is very nice, and it can even one-tap the small bots to the body, so it's actually pretty good for taking out some of the mobs. Now you'll find out later in the tier list, it's pretty much at the bottom of great. Now the second marksman rifle, the Counter Sniper. Now the Counter Sniper was heavily buffed. It is a very solid single target weapon. However, it's going to be at the top of the average tier. Again, if you could force your engagements against bugs to be long range, the Counter Sniper actually does very solid damage. It has medium armor pen. It'll kill Bile Spitters very fast. It'll kill Hive Guards. It's actually very solid single target damage against bugs, but you just can't force those long range engagements all the time. And as soon as you find yourself getting swarmed, you'll kind of wish you had a different weapon. At the same time, I almost want to put this at the bottom of single target just to tell people that this is actually a really solid weapon. If you are using like a flamethrower, for example, and you need a gun for Bile Spitters, it's really not that bad, but I just don't think it's as useful against bugs as it is bots, so I am keeping it at the top of my average tier for now. Now against bots, on the other hand, you'll see that the Counter Sniper by the end of this list, it'll be near the top of great. It one-taps Devastators to the head, it has great handling, it kills all the small bots very easily, it has medium armor pen. You can shoot this against the Factory Strider turrets, for example, for that reason. Even though it's not the best weapon to take out Factory Strider turrets, it is a very solid weapon, and I think since they buffed this in the last patch, a lot of people are enjoying this weapon right now. And honestly, if you like marksman rifles, I think the Counter Sniper is the best one, and I definitely recommend it to those who like that playstyle. All right, so now moving on to the Defender, and the Defender is a very solid weapon against bugs. Now this gun does good damage, it has good accuracy, it has a really big magazine, and most notably, it's a one-handed weapon, so you can run away from groups of hunters while shooting and spraying behind you. It actually does stagger hunters a little bit, so if you're really good at flicking between targets, targets. This is actually a very solid mob clearing weapon against bugs. I think the Defender is a bit underrated when it comes to bugs. People just think it's a ballistic shield weapon, but it's really not. It's very solid. Now, against bots, on the other hand, this is pretty much a ballistic shield weapon. Most notably, this 2 shots Devastators to the head. So like how I talked about all the Liberator variants, 3 shot them, the Defender 2 shots them. Now, you'll notice on this list, it does end up near around the middle of the great tier, and that's because I do think that this gun against bots is pretty much delegated to the ballistic shield. I think you could use it without the ballistic shield because it does have really good handling and it is very accurate, but at the same time, it's definitely best when it is paired with that shield. And I think if you're not using the ballistic shield, which a lot of people aren't, then it's still a good weapon, don't get me wrong, but if you're not using the ballistic shield, you definitely want to go with like the counter sniper or the Dominator or some other weapons we're going to be talking about later. All right, so now on to the Pummeler, another new gun from the warbond. Now, the Pummeler is basically a Defender clone, except it has concussive. And how we just talked about how the Defender is basically better than the Liberator, well, the Pummeler is way better than the concussive Liberator. And personally, I feel that a lot of people are calling this new warbond bad, and they're kind of sleeping on the Pummeler right now. Or we also have that unspoken rule where we just call it bad so that the devs don't nerf it. But ultimately, the Pummeler is very, very solid. This thing will stun lock any enemy below Chargers, and I'm going to be experimenting with this gun in particular a lot more. Now, it does have 5 less damage than the Defender, but it doesn't reach a break point where it takes less bullets against bugs that you're going to be noticing that damage difference. If anything, the less fire rate is more noticeable, but the stagger definitely makes up for it. You can actually stun lock stalkers, and that is the big difference between the Pummeler and the Defender. This thing is a stalker killer. Now, it does stay in the mob clear spot. It can actually interrupt the green bile spitters from shooting at you, but it doesn't really do a great job at killing green bile spitters. So you might want to stun them just to get them to stop spitting and then switch off to your grenade pistol or switch off to your support weapon. It really is a mobbing weapon, and it's probably less good against bugs than it is bots, just because bugs have a lot tankier enemies underneath the Chargers, whereas against bots, most of the mobs are just Devastators, and it 2-taps them in the face. Now, I will say that it 2-taps them in the face at close range. I'm not sure if it has damage fall off for longer range. This gun did just come out, and I do have to experiment with it a bit more, but the concussive aspect of this weapon is way more noticeable against bots, considering the fact that they're all firing at you from long range. You can actually use this gun against rocket Devastators with or without the ballistic shield, and most notably, with the ballistic shield, you can use this against rocket Devastators, which is insane, because with the Defender and the ballistic shield, you can't actually use this against rocket Devastators. You'll have to dodge. You have to dip and weave from those rockets, even if you're using your ballistic shield. I think this gun's concussive aspect is, I gotta mess with it a bit more. I want to test it against Hulks. I want to test it against Chargers. This gun is actually pretty insane, and I think a lot of people, once again, are kind of sleeping on it. I honestly highly rate the Defender already, and the Pummeler seems like a strict upgrade when it comes to bots. All right, so now moving on to bugs, we've got the Punisher. Now, the Punisher is going to go into the single target tier. I think the Punisher is a great weapon to bring with you against bugs. It's definitely not the best gun out there. You'll notice once we rank more guns, the Punisher might end up a little bit lower compared to another single target weapon. But the main draw of this weapon is the stagger. Now, just like the Pummeler, it is light penetrating, and you can stagger the green bile spitters. But you'll notice that the Punisher can take out those green bile spitters just by brute forcing damage a lot faster, because it does have, I think, what, 400 damage per shot? The Punisher is honestly an insanely powerful weapon, and it staggers enemies. Now, against bots, on the other hand, the Punisher's actually gonna go into niche tier for me. Since it is a shotgun and it shoots pellets, it does really fall off at range, but you can actually stagger lock groups of Devastators, and you can kind of support your teammates with it. Now, when you're comparing this to the Pummeler, you might ask yourself, well, why would I ever bring the Punisher when I could just stagger lock groups of Devastators with the Pummeler? And you would be right. You probably wouldn't want to ever bring this over the Pummeler, considering that the Punisher is a close range weapon, and the Pummeler can actually be used at a pretty solid medium range. But at the same time, I do think it's better than most people think, because it does stagger lock Devastators. It's just that I can't really put it into great tier because it does really, really fall off at range. You won't really be killing a lot of enemies from medium range at all with this. And that's about it for this weapon. Now moving on to the Slugger. And the Slugger for me is all right against bugs. When they removed a lot of the the stagger from this weapon. I felt like it really fell off. It does have medium armor penetration, but when I was using it recently, it just wasn't killing those bile spitters for me as fast as I would have liked it to. If it killed bile spitters a bit faster, I would honestly keep it in a solid single target weapon for bugs, but it just really didn't kill them as fast as I wanted it to. That's really all I can say about it. So I'm putting it in the average tier against bugs. Now, on the other hand, against bots, it has to go into the trash ass cheeks dog duckus tier. The main draw against bots was, again, the stagger. Shoot the Slugger at the chest plate, which is medium armor. It won't even stagger them anymore. It just kind of flinches them. And unfortunately, flinching doesn't interrupt their attacks. It just makes their accuracy a bit lower. So you'll end up shooting Devastators with it, but they can still fire their guns at you. I really don't recommend the Slugger against bots anymore at all. All right, so moving on to the Breaker. The Breaker is a very, very solid mob clearing weapon. The Breaker was nerfed at launch and a bunch of people stopped using it. But realistically, what that nerf did is it just removed 3 ammo from the magazine. It is still one of the highest DPS weapons in the game. Now you'll notice I did put it below the Defender. And the only reason for that is because what it felt like using this gun. I had to reload so much that it made my feelings of the gun go down. Now, ultimately, if you practice with this gun, I actually think it's probably does belong higher on the mob clear tier. But at the same time, just having to reload the gun feels a bit bad, and so for me, I put it below the Defender right now, and that's just against bugs, by the way. It really is still one of the highest DPS weapons in the game. It really still is a great mob clear weapon. If you like the Breaker, if you want to use the Breaker, then bring it. You're not going to be neutering your build at all, but I do think there is a couple better options, but it's definitely above average, and I am not putting it in the average tier. Now, against bots, on the other hand, I honestly thought the Breaker would be good, because again, the Breaker, they didn't nerf the damage compared to launch. They only nerfed the mag size. And it actually surprised me against bots that I'm going to be putting this in the trash ass cheeks dog duckus tier. Now, the reason I'm putting it in this tier is because from any sort of range at all, it does nothing. Even from close range, by the time you can kill Devastators if you shoot them in the penis, but by the time it does kill them, it takes what, 3 to 4 shots, and then you have to reload your gun. And the reason this surprised me is because this was an S tier weapon against both factions on launch. Now, I didn't really play a lot of bots on launch, and by the time this gun got nerfed, I was already testing out a bunch of other guns, but I saw a ton of tier lists putting this against S tier against bugs and bots, so it honestly surprised me that it felt this bad against bots right now. All right, so now on to the Breaker Spray and Pray. Against bugs, I'm putting it right below the Breaker. It honestly is a solid mob clear weapon, but at the same time, when I was playing it, the pellet spread of this weapon is very wide, so it's actually only more usable from a closer range versus the Breaker, which can take out bugs from a medium range or a medium to close range. But the Breaker Spray and Pray is really only good from very, very close range, which really isn't a problem against bugs, and that's why it's above average. It is in the mob clear tier, but I would rather bring a regular Breaker compared to a Breaker Spray and Pray, and that's just me personally. Now, against bots, on the other hand, you noticed I said that the Breaker really, really falls off at any sort of range against them. Well, the Breaker Spray and Pray is only good from super close range, so this is going in the worse than dog duckus, but still better than the cringe paywall tier. Do not bring this gun against bots. You are actually throwing. All right, so moving on to the Breaker Incendiary. This one is going at the top of mob clear for me, mainly because this has a really, really fat magazine, and the damage of it compared to the Breaker, it has a lot less damage. However, you can normally kill a lot of the mobs in one shot, and that fat magazine, you'll really feel it. Now, at the same time, even though it has less damage than the Breaker, it applies fire dots to enemies, which you could just spray this. You could start on the left of a big group of enemies and just spray it and move to the right and just dot everything up. By the time you go back to cycle to the start of the group again, you'll notice that some enemies died to the fire dot. But if you do practice with this gun, you could figure out the breakpoints of like how much you need to shoot each enemy and then let the fire dot kill them. This gun's just really freaking strong against bugs. I really recommend using it. All right, now on to bots. This is actually the only gun that's going into the forgot to switch my loadout when I was fighting bugs, and it surprisingly works against bots. And the reason for this is the fire dot. Now, like I said, the Breaker falls off at range. With the Breaker Incendiary, you're not going to be killing any bots from range, except, oh wait, it applies a fire dot to them. And if you forget to switch your bug loadout, you will find that this gun surprisingly works. Now what you want to do with this gun is actually just fire it at range at an enemy, land a single pellet on them, set them on fire. Now against all the small bots, the fire dot will automatically kill the small bots. Against Devastators, on the other hand, it's not that great, but what you'll need to do is basically kite them in a sense, where you come out of cover, fire a single pellet at all of them, light them all on fire, go back undercover, let them burn for a little bit, and repeat until they die. You'll notice it takes about 3 or 4 shots and the dot to tick on them to kill Devastators, so it's really not the best weapon. But again, you just forget to switch your loadout, and it surprisingly works against bots. It's really not all that terrible. All right, so moving on to the Explosive Crossbow. Now, the Explosive Crossbow was notably nerfed this patch, but I actually don't think it's a trash tier weapon. It's pretty average. Against bugs, it does have a splash radius that can kill a lot of the bugs, but it only has 5 bullets in the mag. It doesn't have the fastest fire rate ever, and it's really just that splash radius kind of carrying it into the average tier versus the trash tier. Now, notably, it does have medium armor penetration, and it can actually 2-tap stalkers if you shoot them in the face. Crossbow, it's kind of the feeling of this weapon that brings it down. I do think they could swap the values of the impact damage and the splash damage. So the crossbow does 420 damage total. I believe it's 250 from the impact bullet and 170 from the explosive splash damage. And I think if they swapped those two values, this gun would get instantly better, because then it would do more damage to the to like the enemies it doesn't hit directly and that it splashes off of. And I think that change alone could bump this gun up into the mob clear. However, I'm not sure, but overall it's just pretty average against bugs. It's really not trash tier. Now against bots, on the other hand, I have seen some niche uses for stealth, so keep in mind the crossbow is technically the quietest weapon, but any sort of extended engagement you get into where a bunch of bots start swarming, you will notice that this gun really sucks against large groups of bots. Again, it only has 5 in the magazine. You have to headshot Devastators to kill them, and that's pretty tough when there's 10 of them looking at you. Otherwise, I think it takes like 3 shots to a Devastator chest plate. And the description of this weapon is that it implants a shaped charge. It would be really cool to shoot this into a chest of a Devastator and then it just kind of explodes. But until they up the damage on this gun, I really don't recommend it against the bots at all. But since it does have that niche use of being a really cool stealth weapon, I don't really want to put this lower than where I have it right now, because I think some people are enjoying this gun against bots. I just don't think it's many people. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about the Dominator. Now, the Dominator is a top tier single target weapon. It smashes through bile spitters, it smashes stalkers, it staggers enemies. Basically the entire nerf to the Slugger, they gave it to the Dominator. Now the Dominator is going to be a gun that pairs very well with the flamethrower. You have the flamethrower for your mob, and you have the Dominator for the single target bile spitters or the stalker, because the flamethrower doesn't really stagger any enemies, and sometimes you just need to interrupt those spit attacks, and it really gets the job done. And the same thing goes for bots. The Dominator will one-tap Devastators to the head, but if you miss the head, it will stagger lock them. Now, personally, I like the Dominator in burst mode, and I kind of just like to spam it. A lot of people, on the other hand, like this gun in single fire, but I just like spamming this against Devastators, because if I miss their head, I believe it 3-taps them in the chest. However, the main reason I like spamming it is because if you get that one lucky shot to land in the head while they're staggered, you just end up killing them right there, and it's pretty great. Now, again, this stagger locks enemies, so if you are coming up against a specific enemy, you can just stagger them, and then the heavy Devastator won't be shooting you anymore. Now, most notably, the Dominator is very solid at shooting the Fabricator Strider's machine guns out, even from a long range. So don't sleep on this weapon. Honestly, I don't think many people do. I don't really gotta explain this one much further. All right, so moving on to the Eruptor. Now, the Eruptor is gonna go into the niche bug hole tier. Technically, this is niche, okay? It is the only primary in the game that shoots and destroys bug holes. I gotta put this here just on principle, but I would like to remind you guys that this gun has the exact same damage of the crossbow, but it has a much slower fire rate. Now, notably, it does have a larger AoE than the crossbow, but ultimately this gun is just not that good for actual combat activities. Why would you even bring this gun to destroy bug holes when you could just bring the grenade pistol, or you could use a support weapon that's actually good at mobbing, like the grenade launcher or the autocannon? I really don't even recommend using this gun, but it does technically go into the niche tier. tier. And against bots, it goes into the same tier for the same reason. Now, the devs removed the shrapnel because of a bug, and I believe they are trying to rework it and bring shrapnel back. So really, we're just waiting for that update to see if they bring shrapnel back and how strong it's going to be at that point. So we've got the Punisher Plasma going into the explosive weapon spot. Now, notably, you'll notice that the Crossbow, the Eruptor, those are explosive weapons, but they didn't make it into this slot because this is my top tier explosive weapon slot. The Plasma Punisher is amazing. It's really good at taking down groups of mobs, but it's also really good at single target. It's honestly an all-rounder weapon, but at the same time, you can kill Chargers with it, and you can notably really quickly take out the Bile Titan sacks, or if you break a hole in the top of the Bile Titan's armor, you could just kill it from there with the Plasma Punisher. Now, one thing I would like to point out is don't shoot this gun near you. If you're using the Plasma Punisher, you might want to bring the Redeemer if you're not using a mobbing support weapon. Unless you're really desperate and just want to kill a couple bugs before you end up dying, then go ahead and just shoot this at the bug in your face. But the Plasma Punisher is pretty top tier against bugs, and it's in the explosive slot. Now, against bots, on the other hand, the Plasma Punisher goes from great and amazing to absolutely insane. The Plasma Punisher can stagger lock groups of Devastator. This gun feels really, really great against bots. It is one of the top weapons against bots right now, in my opinion. If you haven't tried this gun against bots, then you really should. Now, notably, you can arc this and kind of fire it like a mortar from behind cover, but mainly, if you can manage to land this on top of tanks and you get good with your aiming of it, you can kill a tank from the front using this weapon. Now, obviously, you probably will need cover to do this with, but just keep in mind, like I said, explosive weapons have notable strengths against heavy targets, and in this case, against bots, it is heat sink. So not only is this great at stagger locking groups of Devastators, but it can also kill tanks because you don't have to actually shoot the heat sink itself. You just have to get the AoE to land nearby it. And so I highly recommend the Plasma Punisher right now. All right, so now on to the Blitzer. Against bugs, I'm putting this into the all-rounder tier, and I actually had to add this all-rounder tier specifically for the Blitzer. The Blitzer can be pretty decent at taking down groups of mobs, but it's not necessarily the best mob clear weapon. Like if we're looking for pure mob clear, then the Breaker Incendiary is your go-to, or the Pummeler, or the Defender, or something like that. But at the same time, it's a pretty solid single target weapon, and notably because of the stagger. So it's kind of a jack of all trades weapon, master of none, but at the same time, it's nothing to scoff at. It's not like it does both jobs poorly. It does both jobs above average. So I don't think it's necessarily S tier in mob clear, and I don't think it's an S tier single target, because you do also have to be pretty close to your enemy to even be able to hit them with this. But at the same time, it's A tier at both. So it's pretty much an all-rounder, and it's pretty solid no matter what. Now against bots, at the other hand, you have to be within 35 meters to even hit them. This is going into the worse than Dog Duckus tier, but better than the cringe paywall. The Blitzer, do not bring this against bots. You are pretty much trolling, in my opinion. I'm sure there's someone out there who uses the Blitzer against bots and they actually clean up with it. But for me personally, I will never bring this gun against bots ever again. Main reason being that 35-meter range, but also because I just could not kill Devastators with this even when I was within that range. Maybe there's some trick where you aim above them and then you could get it to hit their head, but I couldn't get it to work, so honestly I just don't recommend it. All right, so moving on to the Scythe, and the Scythe was a notably trash tier weapon for most people, but they buffed the Scythe recently, and I'm actually putting it in the bottom of mob clear tier. And in my opinion, the Scythe is a lot better now with a lot of its buffs. Now against bugs, I was running it with the Laser Buddy just because I wanted to laser max, and I recommend you use it with the Laser Buddy because using every single laser possible, including the orbital laser by the way, is just the funnest way to play the game. Now I will tell you guys, when you're fighting against bugs, you honestly want to shoot some of their legs off. Against most bugs, you have to shoot 3 legs off, but against a lot of bugs, you only need to shoot 2. Now against the smaller bugs, don't worry about that. So the hunters, the scavengers, just shoot them in the head. Even the warriors shoot them in the head. Now notably, the Scythe doesn't have any sort of stagger because it is a laser weapon, so it's at the bottom of the mob clear slot for me. But it honestly felt way better against bugs than it used to. Now, against bots, on the other hand, the Scythe cleans up. It's going at the bottom of the great tier, and I'm gonna tell you guys why. Now, the main thing holding the Scythe back against bots is the scope. If we ever get weapon customizations in the future, and if I could put the Sickle scope onto the Scythe, I genuinely think this gun is stronger than the counter sniper. And you might say I'm crazy, but go shoot this at a bot's head. It instantly takes out the small bots. It pretty much instantly takes down Devastators. It truly is just the scope holding this gun back against bots right now, so it has to go at the bottom of the great tier, but really look out for this gun against bots if we ever get, if we could switch scopes around. This gun literally kills them so fast, it's insane. And the fact that it just kills Devastators as fast as it does and bots, it's not an average weapon, it's not a trash weapon, it is a great weapon. But again, that big red dot in the middle and no zoom on the scope kind of holds this gun back. So let's go ahead and talk about the Sickle. So the Sickle against bugs for me personally is right under the Defender. Now I think that these guns have very similar power levels. I think that the Sickle potentially has infinite ammo, but the main reason I like the Defender a bit more is because I can run away and shoot it at the same time. But ultimately the Sickle is still a really great weapon. It's above the Breaker for me because you can get that max ammo potential, but at the same time there's such a large amount of bugs, it's kind of hard to do that. But this gun has insane fire rate. It can shoot pretty much almost 100 bullets before you even have to stop shooting it to let the heatsink cool off. If you have to reload it in a pinch, don't be afraid to do so, but obviously once you get back down to that last ice, you're gonna have to be careful shooting this gun. But it's just a very solid weapon overall, and it has the potential to go infinite, so it's definitely up near the top of the mob clear tier. But for bots on the other hand, I rate it a bit higher than the Defender, and the main reason for that is because you don't need to use this with the ballistic shield, whereas I feel like with the Defender you kind of do. Now the Sickle also has a really good scope on it. You can shoot this from long range, and even though it does still take 3 shots to headshot the Devastators, the main thing I want to point out for people to do with the Sickle against bots is shoot off Devastator weapons. So the rocket Devastators, shoot off their rocket pods. The heavy Devastators, it's a bit harder to shoot off their gun while they're spraying it at you, but you can shoot off the heavy Devastator's gun. Or you could just spam this thing at their eyeballs and then just get those 3 lucky headshots. It's pretty solid no matter how you decide to use this. Now, what's notable about the Sickle versus bots compared to Sickle versus bugs is bugs just throw a lot more enemies in your face and you kind of max out your heat sink unintentionally. Against bots, trigger discipline is a lot easier. So the Sickle is a lot easier to go infinite on ammo, and it's just very solid for that reason. All right, so on to the Scorcher. The Scorcher goes into our explosive tier right below the Plasma Punisher. The Plasma Punisher does do only 50 more damage than the Scorcher, and it is a bit harder to shoot and use from a bit of a closer range, but it does have a larger splash radius, so it's very good for mobbing. But the Scorcher is still just a solid weapon. Before any of the premium warbonds came out, the Scorcher was the best gun in the game when we only had the base warbond. It was just at level 10, and so nobody really had it unlocked yet, and a lot of people weren't using it. But now that all the warbonds are out, it's really not necessarily the best gun in the game anymore, but it's just very solid. It's honestly where a lot of the guns should be balanced around. It's good against weak spots like I mentioned. It's good against single targets. It can be used for mobbing, but it does feel a bit light on ammo sometimes. It's just very, very solid and very reliable, and it's going to go in the same place against bots. Again, it's just very freaking solid. It can be used to kill Devastators, small bots. You can shoot the sides of tank heat sinks. I do feel the Plasma Punisher is a bit nicer because you can arc it and land it on top of tanks. You can also shoot the backside underneath the cannon turrets. So if the cannon turret heat sink is facing away from you, but you're kind of on the side of it, you can shoot underneath and take out a cannon turret's bottom of its heatsink, and it's very solid for that reason. All right, so moving on to the last gun from the new warbond, the Purifier. You would think that the Purifier would go into the explosive tier. It does the same damage as the Plasma Punisher. It has a pretty high range, but the issue with the Purifier is it shoots as slow as the arc thrower. It has a very low fire rate. Now, before the Plasma Punisher got buffed, no one was really using it because the projectile speed was very slow and it was very clunky. And the same thing goes for the Purifier, except in this case, the fire rate's really slow. I don't even know where I would put the Purifier. It feels really bad because you need a lot of bullets to take down a lot of enemies. Like the Plasma Punisher doesn't one-shot anything. It like 3 shots like some of the single target enemies, or even sometimes 4 or 5, but the Purifier just has really slow fire rate. Now, I'm not gonna put this in the trash tier because at the end of the day, it is a plasma bullet, which is pretty powerful, but they honestly need to give higher damage to this weapon and balance its DPS with the Plasma Punisher and the Scorcher. So if you guys are watching this video after this gun gets buffed, what I'll say is if it gets at least like a 75% damage increase, if it does at least 450 to 500 damage after a buff. Then I'll put it back in the explosive tier, as it would just be a side grade to those other explosive weapons, but in the meantime, it's kind of bad. And same thing against bots, I'm gonna stick it in the average tier above the Adjudicator. Again, it's a plasma shot, so it can't be horrible at the end of the day, but it just has really slow fire rate. It is not super effective. It's not very fun to use for that reason. It's just one of those things where, like, if you're charging a bullet for a solid second, you would think that it would one-shot Devastators, but it just doesn't. You need to get multiple shots into them, and with the slow fire rate, it's really holding it back. But again, it's a marksman rifle. I don't want them to buff the fire rate at all. I would rather them buff the damage. If we want to spam plasma bullets, we'll use the Punisher or the Scorcher. But if you want to use the marksman rifle, then we should be able to get that higher damage so we could get satisfying one-shots. So hopefully they buff the damage of this weapon, but in the meantime, this is my tier list, and this is the one I have for bugs, so this is my one for bugs this patch, and here is the one that I have for bots. So if you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like on it and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. I'm out.